The WNBA just agreed to the biggest labor deal in league history. And whether people like it or not, one question immediately followed. Would this deal look the same without Caitlin Clark? And no matter how uncomfortable that makes some people, Caitlin Clark is a huge part of why this moment looks the way it does. That does not mean she did it alone. It does not erase the years veterans spent fighting for better pay, better travel, better housing, and better working conditions. But it does mean this. When the money finally jumped, the league was no longer negotiating from the position it used to be in, because the economics changed, and Caitlin Clark helped change them fast. That is the part people keep dancing around. For years, WNBA players pushed for more salary, more respect, better infrastructure, a bigger share of the value they were helping create. That fight mattered. It laid the foundation. But what changed recently was scale. The ratings changed, the ticket demand changed, the sponsorship environment changed, the national attention changed. And when those things change all at once, the league gains a different kind of leverage in labor talks. That is where Caitlin Clark enters the picture. She did not invent women's basketball. She did not build the entire league herself, but she accelerated the business side of the WNBA in a way that became impossible to ignore. You could see it in the viewership. You could see it in the sold-out arenas. You could see it in the road demand. You could see it in the media rights conversation. You could see it in how often the league suddenly became part of broader sports discussion. That kind of attention changes negotiations, because once the numbers move, the argument gets stronger. It is one thing for players to say the league deserves more investment. It is another thing to walk into a room with exploding ratings, fuller arenas, bigger sponsorship relevance, and proof that the product has become more valuable. That is why this new agreement feels so significant. It is not just about better salaries. It is about the league officially stepping into a new financial reality. And that reality is much bigger than the old one. The old salary structure was built for a smaller version of the WNBA, a version with less attention, less reach, less media pressure, and less commercial energy. That is no longer the environment the league is operating in. And once that became obvious, the old pay model started looking impossible to defend. That is especially true when it came to Caitlin Clark herself. Because for all the attention, all the revenue conversation, all the sold-out arenas and record-breaking reach, her rookie-scale pay always looked absurdly low compared to the value surrounding her. That is why this new framework matters so much symbolically. It is the league finally acknowledging that when a player changes the economics around the sport, the compensation system has to be able to respond faster. Not years later, not after the old rookie structure quietly underpays someone through the most explosive commercial stretch of their career. Now, that does not mean Clark is the only player who benefits. Far from it. This is where the conversation has to stay balanced. Veteran stars matter. Foundational stars matter. Players who carried the league through harder years absolutely matter. A'ja Wilson matters. Breanna Stewart matters. Napheesa Collier matters. Alyssa Thomas matters. And many others matter too. The reason this deal is so important is because it lifts the whole salary structure, not just one player. That is the win. Higher pay, higher minimums, more flexibility for elite performers, a system that better reflects the modern size of the league. That is real progress. But it is also where the next problem starts. Because once the money goes up, roster building gets harder. And nowhere is that tension more interesting than Indiana. That is where this story becomes more than celebration. Because the Fever now have to build around a player whose value to the league keeps rising, while also managing the financial reality of everybody else around her. That is the part fans need to pay close attention to. A bigger cap sounds simple from the outside. More money should mean fewer problems. But in practice, it often creates a new set of difficult decisions. Who gets extended first? Who gets max money? Who becomes too expensive to keep? How much depth can you still afford after paying your stars what they are worth? That is the real next chapter, and Indiana is walking right into it. Kelsey Mitchell is not just another name on the roster. She is one of the most dangerous scorers in the league. Aliyah Boston is not just a young front-court piece. She is a foundational player. Clark, Boston, and Mitchell together give Indiana one of the most interesting cores in basketball. But cores get expensive, fast. That is what this new money era always does. It rewards value more honestly, but it also forces harder choices. So the same collective bargaining agreement that feels like a breakthrough for player compensation could eventually squeeze teams that suddenly have multiple stars to pay at once. That is not a contradiction. That is how sports economics usually work. The league becomes healthier. Players get closer to what they deserve. Front offices get less room to hide from hard decisions. And in Indiana's case, those decisions are going to define whether this era becomes a contender or just a fascinating what if. That is why the Clark conversation cannot stop at "she changed the money." She helped accelerate the league's growth and became a major factor in this new financial reality. But the more interesting question now is, what happens next because of it? Can the Fever keep the right core together? Can they manage rising salaries without losing too much depth? Can the league keep adjusting its systems so that transformational players are compensated more fairly without forcing chaos everywhere else? That is the real pressure point. Not whether Clark deserves more. She obviously does. Not whether veterans deserve more. They obviously do too. The real pressure point is whether the WNBA can build a structure that reflects modern value without creating roster instability every time a star becomes too important to underpay. And that is why this agreement matters so much. It is not just a raise. It is not just better optics. It is not just a headline. It is the league finally admitting that the old numbers no longer match the new reality. Caitlin Clark helped force that reality into the open. Veterans helped build the path that made a deal like this possible. And now the entire WNBA has to live in the version of the business that follows. That is the new era. And Indiana may be the first team that has to figure out how expensive success really is.